Becoming the strongest version of yourself does not begin in a gym, and it does not begin in a library. It begins with the destruction of a lie so deeply embedded in your mind that you stopped questioning it years ago. From childhood, you were conditioned to believe that strength and intelligence exist on opposite ends of a spectrum, that choosing one requires sacrificing the other. You saw it in cartoons, movies, classrooms, and even casual jokes. The strong man was always portrayed as slow, simple, impulsive. The intelligent man was shown as weak, fragile, physically insignificant. Over time, this narrative hardened into truth. You internalized it without resistance. You picked a side, often unconsciously, and built your identity around it. But this lie was never harmless. It was a quiet theft of your full potential. Society benefits when people accept limitation as identity. When you believe you can only be one thing, you become manageable, predictable, incomplete. A man who is intelligent but physically weak can design systems, analyze problems, imagine solutions, yet lacks the embodied presence to execute decisively under pressure. A man who is physically strong but mentally undisciplined can act, but without strategy, foresight, or restraint. Both are half-formed. Neither is dangerous. True danger emerges only when mind and body unite, when intelligence has weight behind it, when strength is guided by clarity. History understood this. Modern culture does not. The greatest men who ever lived were never divided. They were not specialists trapped in narrow definitions. They were integrated beings. Warriors who studied philosophy. Thinkers who endured physical hardship. Leaders whose presence alone could command silence before a single word was spoken. Their power did not come from motivation or talent. It came from alignment. Their bodies reinforced their minds. Their minds directed their bodies. One system. One weapon. But somewhere along the way, that understanding was erased, replaced with comfort-driven narratives that rewarded convenience over completeness. The result of this division is everywhere. Brilliant men paralyzed by anxiety when pressure rises. Sharp minds unable to speak with authority when it matters most. Endless thinking without execution. Endless planning without action. Men who know exactly what should be done, yet feel an invisible resistance when it's time to act. They call it fear. They call it procrastination. They call it burnout. But the truth is simpler and more uncomfortable. Their bodies are not trained to carry the weight of their intelligence. The vessel is weak, so the mind hesitates. This is not a character flaw. It is not laziness. It is not a lack of discipline in the way people usually mean it. It is biological and psychological misalignment. A nervous system untrained for stress will sabotage even the sharpest intellect. A body unfamiliar with strain will signal danger at the first sign of pressure. The mind, sensing that the body cannot handle consequence, pulls back. It overthinks. It delays. It seeks safety in theory instead of action. This is how potential dies quietly, without drama, without failure obvious enough to demand change. Ancient warrior traditions understood something modern self-improvement culture avoids. Training the body is not about appearance. It is about preparing the nervous system to remain calm when chaos arrives. It is about teaching the mind, through physical stress, that discomfort is survivable. That pressure does not equal danger. That effort does not equal collapse. When the body learns this lesson, the mind follows. Clarity emerges not from more thinking, but from less internal resistance. Focus sharpens because there is nothing left to argue with. This is why the forbidden discipline exists. Not forbidden because it is secret, but because it contradicts everything you were taught to believe about yourself. It demands that you stop choosing between strength and intelligence and instead claim both. It requires you to abandon the identity that kept you comfortable and step into one that makes you capable. This path is not motivational. It does not rely on hype or emotion. It relies on training. Repetition. Discomfort chosen deliberately. The same principle followed by warriors across centuries who refused to live divided lives. Before you learn methods, routines, or systems, this lie must be burned to the ground. Until you reject the false choice completely, no habit will hold, no discipline will last. You cannot build elite focus on a fractured foundation. The mind and body were never meant to be enemies. They were designed to sharpen each other. And the moment you understand this, truly understand it, something irreversible begins. You stop asking how to improve and start asking how far integration can take you. The moment this lie cracks, something unsettling follows. You begin to see how deeply it shaped every decision you made without realizing it. The choices you called preferences were often just adaptations to limitation. You leaned into thinking because your body felt unreliable. Or you leaned into physical action because stillness and reflection felt foreign. Over time, these adaptations hardened into personality. I'm just not athletic. I'm not built for pressure. I'm more of a thinker than a doer. These statements felt harmless, even self-aware, but they were quiet surrender. Each one reinforced the wall between what you are and what you could be. This division doesn't show itself loudly. It shows up in subtle failures. In moments where you know the answer but hesitate to speak. In situations where you feel the right move in your gut but overanalyze until the moment passes. In opportunities missed not because you lacked intelligence, but because your presence lacked weight. You sense it when others with less insight but stronger composure move ahead of you. Not because they are better, but because their words land. Their bodies carry conviction. Their nervous systems don't collapse under attention. The modern world mislabels this problem. It calls it confidence. It sells it as mindset. It tells you to visualize harder, think positively, repeat affirmations. But confidence without a trained body is fragile. It shatters under pressure because there is nothing underneath it. The mind cannot lie to itself forever. It knows when the body is unprepared. And when stakes rise, truth surfaces. Your breath shortens. Your chest tightens. Your thoughts scatter. This is not weakness of character. It is a body untrained for consequence. Ancient disciplines never separated preparation from reality. A warrior did not debate fear away. He trained until fear lost authority. He did not analyze stress into submission. He conditioned his body to endure it. Through repetition under strain, the nervous system learned a new baseline. What once felt overwhelming became normal. What once triggered panic became manageable. And from that biological shift emerged something modern people misunderstand entirely: calm. Calm is not the absence of intensity. It is control within intensity. It is the ability to think clearly while the heart rate is elevated, while the environment is uncertain, while the outcome is not guaranteed. This state cannot be learned through reading alone. It must be installed physically. When the body experiences voluntary hardship and survives it repeatedly, it sends a signal upward. I can handle this. The mind listens. Focus stabilizes. Decisions sharpen. Action becomes possible. This is why the forbidden discipline feels uncomfortable at first. It exposes the mismatch between how capable you believe yourself to be and how capable your body actually is. The first confrontation is humiliating. Simple effort reveals hidden fragility. Muscles shake. Breath fails. Ego collapses. But beneath that discomfort lies truth. And truth, unlike motivation, can be built upon. Each session of strain becomes a negotiation with yourself. Quit or continue. Escape or endure. Over time, these negotiations forge something rare: internal authority. Internal authority changes everything. When your body trusts itself, your mind stops sabotaging you. Thoughts become direct instead of scattered. Attention narrows instead of jumping. You stop rehearsing failure because your system no longer expects it. This is where elite focus actually comes from. Not hacks. Not productivity tricks. From alignment. From knowing, at a biological level, that when pressure arrives, you will not fold. Most people never experience this shift because they never train long enough for it to occur. They flirt with discomfort, retreat at resistance, and remain trapped in explanation. But the ones who stay, who endure the awkward phase, the weakness, the embarrassment, unlock something ancient and powerful. They become integrated. Their intelligence gains force. Their presence gains gravity. They stop operating at half capacity without even realizing they once were. This is the second awakening. Not just realizing the lie existed, but seeing its consequences everywhere in your life. And once seen, it cannot be unseen. From here, the path forward becomes unavoidable. You either return to division knowingly, or you step fully into integration and accept the discipline required to sustain it. The third realization arrives quietly, almost without drama, but it is the most dangerous one of all. You begin to understand that most of your thinking was never pure thinking. It was delay disguised as intelligence. It was hesitation wearing the costume of strategy. The mind, when unsupported by a capable body, learns to protect itself by postponing action. It convinces you that more information is needed, more certainty, more preparation. In truth, it is waiting for safety that never comes. This is how potential rots without ever being tested. When the body is weak or untrained, the mind becomes cautious by necessity. It senses that mistakes would be costly because recovery would be slow. So it creates complexity. It adds layers, frameworks, contingency plans, endless scenarios. On the surface, this looks like intelligence. Underneath, it is fear management. The mind is doing its best to keep you alive inside a system that cannot handle chaos. And because modern life rarely forces immediate physical consequence, this pattern can continue for years unnoticed. This is why so many people feel mentally exhausted despite doing very little that is truly demanding. Their brains are working overtime to compensate for physical unreadiness. They are running simulations instead of running miles. They are rehearsing conversations instead of standing firmly in them. They are thinking themselves into paralysis. And the longer this goes on, the more foreign decisive action feels. Eventually, movement itself begins to feel risky. The forbidden discipline reverses this relationship. It shifts the burden back where it belongs. Instead of the mind protecting the body begins protecting the mind. Through consistent exposure to controlled stress, the body learns resilience. Muscles strengthen, lungs expand, posture changes, hormones recalibrate. But more importantly, the nervous system adapts. Stress stops meaning danger. Discomfort stops meaning failure. Effort stops meaning threat. And as this recalibration happens, the mind is freed from constant vigilance. This is the moment when thought becomes sharp instead of loud. You notice it first in silence. Fewer mental loops. Less internal noise. You can sit with a problem without drowning in it. Ideas emerge cleanly, without force. Decisions feel simpler, not because life is simpler, but because your system can now support consequence. You are no longer negotiating every action with fear. You are choosing. Ancient warriors understood this intuitively. They did not train to look strong. They trained to remove hesitation. Every repetition was a lesson to the nervous system: this weight will not kill you, this impact will not break you, this exhaustion will not end you. Over time, that lesson generalized. If this doesn't end me, neither will that. If I can stand here, I can stand there. Courage was not summoned. It was installed. Modern people often misunderstand courage as a personality trait. Something you either have or don't. In reality, courage is a physiological state. It is what happens when your body no longer interprets challenge as emergency. When heart rate rises without panic. When adrenaline sharpens instead of scrambles. This state cannot be faked. It must be earned through repeated exposure to difficulty. As this state becomes familiar, something else changes. Your identity loosens. You stop defining yourself by labels like intellectual, creative, introverted, or not physical. Those labels were coping mechanisms, not truths. They were stories built to justify avoidance. With integration, those stories lose power. You begin to experience yourself as adaptable, capable of learning whatever is required. This is where true focus is born. Not the brittle focus that shatters under interruption, but deep focus rooted in confidence of endurance. You can stay with a task longer because you are no longer draining energy resisting discomfort. Effort becomes neutral. Pain becomes information. Fatigue becomes a signal, not a command. By this stage, the discipline no longer feels external. It is no longer something you force yourself to do. It becomes part of how you regulate yourself. Training is not separate from thinking. Movement is not separate from strategy. Life itself becomes practice. And once this integration begins, there is no returning to the old divided way without feeling its weakness immediately. By the fourth stage, the transformation stops being internal only. It begins to leak outward into the way you move through the world. People respond to you differently, often without knowing why. Conversations shift. Eye contact holds longer. Your presence carries a quiet density that wasn't there before. This isn't dominance, and it isn't performance. It's coherence. When the body and mind are no longer in conflict, the signal you emit becomes clean. Others feel it instinctively. This is why words spoken from an integrated state land with more force than perfectly constructed arguments delivered from a fractured one. Communication is not just language. It is posture, breath, timing, stillness. When your nervous system is regulated under pressure, you don't rush to fill silence. You don't over-explain. You don't seek permission for your own thoughts. This restraint gives weight to everything you say. And weight is what most communication lacks. In modern environments, this quality is often mistaken for confidence, but confidence is too shallow a word. Confidence can be borrowed, faked, or inflated. Coherence cannot. It emerges only when internal systems agree with each other. When your body isn't signaling danger while your mind is trying to lead. When your breath isn't panicking while your mouth is speaking calmly. This alignment is rare, and rarity commands attention. Ancient warrior cultures built leadership on this principle. Authority was not granted by title first. It was recognized through presence. A man who could remain steady when others collapsed was trusted instinctively. Not because he spoke the loudest, but because his nervous system did not betray him when stakes rose. Modern hierarchies often reverse this logic, rewarding verbosity over stability. But under real pressure, the old rules return. This is where the discipline reveals its deeper function. It is not self-improvement for its own sake. It is preparation for responsibility. The more integrated you become, the more others unconsciously place weight on you. They look to you during uncertainty. They mirror your calm or your chaos. If you are fractured, that weight will crush you. If you are integrated, it will refine you. Many people sabotage this phase without realizing it. As external feedback improves, ego rushes in. They begin to identify with the image of strength rather than the process that created it. Training becomes performance. Discipline becomes branding. And slowly, the alignment weakens. The body stops being challenged honestly. The mind returns to comfort. The signal degrades. What was once earned becomes acted. The forbidden discipline demands something harsher. It demands that you continue to seek the edge where comfort ends, even when no one is watching. Especially when no one is watching. Because the nervous system does not care about reputation. It only adapts to reality. Skip the strain, and it will regress. Avoid discomfort, and it will relearn fragility. This regression is subtle at first, but it always shows when pressure returns. Those who understand this stop chasing validation early. They train in obscurity. They choose difficulty over applause. They allow their standards to be internal rather than social. This is how coherence is preserved. Not by intensity, but by consistency. Not by extremes, but by returning daily to what is slightly uncomfortable and completing it without negotiation. As this pattern stabilizes, leadership becomes natural rather than sought. You don't try to influence. You simply act with clarity, and others align or move aside. This is not aggression. It is gravity. Gravity does not convince. It pulls. By the end of this stage, you realize something unsettling. The world is not lacking intelligent people. It is lacking integrated ones. And integration, once achieved, changes the cost of inaction. You can no longer tolerate living below your capacity, because you now feel the difference too clearly. By the fifth stage, the discipline stops feeling like something you do and starts feeling like something you are responsible for maintaining. This is where many people quietly fall away, not because the practice is too hard, but because it becomes inescapably honest. There is no longer novelty, no dramatic breakthroughs, no external validation to lean on. What remains is repetition, exposure, and the daily confrontation with your own limits. At this level, excuses lose their power because you can see them forming in real time. You recognize the exact moment when your mind begins negotiating for comfort, and that awareness removes the illusion that the resistance is external. You realize it is always you. This is also the point where discipline separates from motivation completely. Motivation still appears occasionally, but it is no longer trusted. You've seen how unreliable it is, how easily it collapses under fatigue, stress, or boredom. Instead, action becomes procedural. Not robotic, but deliberate. You act because this is what is done, not because you feel inspired to do it. This shift feels dull to those addicted to intensity, but it is precisely what makes the system durable. Intensity burns fast. Procedure endures. At this stage, the body becomes the primary teacher. You stop asking how something should feel and start listening to what it actually does. You notice how consistency rewires your baseline mood, how effort changes your perception of time, how discomfort sharpens rather than damages you when approached correctly. Pain becomes information instead of a threat. Fatigue becomes a signal rather than a stop sign. The body, once avoided, becomes an ally that tells the truth without drama. Mentally, something colder and more stable replaces the earlier emotional drive. You develop what could be called operational clarity. You know what matters, what doesn't, and what can be ignored entirely. This clarity is not optimistic. It is realistic. You stop fantasizing about future versions of yourself and focus instead on what the next correct action is, right now, under current conditions. The gap between intention and execution narrows further, not because you try harder, but because hesitation has lost its narrative. This is where many people become uncomfortable around you, though they may not know why. You no longer participate in collective complaining. You don't exaggerate obstacles. You don't dramatize effort. When something must be done, you do it, and when it cannot be done, you say so plainly without resentment. This refusal to emotionally inflate reality can feel threatening to those who rely on excuses to maintain self-image. Your presence quietly removes their alibis. Internally, the greatest challenge here is restraint. You are now capable of more than before, and the temptation to overreach becomes strong. The ego whispers that if consistency created this much progress, intensity might create even more. This is where many self-disciplined people injure themselves, burn out, or sabotage their own systems. The discipline at this level is not about pushing harder. It is about sustaining pressure without fracture. Precision replaces force. You learn to respect recovery not as rest, but as part of the process. Sleep, stillness, and silence become tools rather than indulgences. You stop glorifying exhaustion and start valuing readiness. This is not softness. It is strategic hardness. A blade kept permanently under strain dulls faster than one sharpened and sheathed with intention. The most subtle transformation of this stage is identity erosion. You stop thinking of yourself as someone trying to be disciplined, and start seeing discipline as the default state that requires no explanation. You don't announce it. You don't defend it. You don't argue about it. You simply live it. And in doing so, you realize something sobering: the greatest barrier was never complexity, resources, or knowledge. It was the refusal to do simple things consistently when no one was watching. That refusal is gone now. By the end of this phase, discipline is no longer a project. It is infrastructure. Invisible when it works, catastrophic when neglected. And because you now understand this, you protect it fiercely, not with obsession, but with quiet, daily respect. The sixth phase begins when discipline is no longer something you actively think about protecting, but something that begins to protect you. This is where the structure you built quietly starts pushing back against chaos. Bad days still happen. Fatigue still appears. Life still interrupts. But now, disruption no longer collapses your system. It bends, absorbs the impact, and returns to form. What once would have been a complete breakdown becomes a temporary slowdown. This resilience is not dramatic. It is subtle, almost boring, and that is precisely why it works. At this stage, you understand that discipline is not about controlling every variable, but about maintaining direction despite variables. You stop expecting perfect conditions because experience has taught you they do not exist. Instead, you ask a different question: what does continuation look like today? Sometimes continuation is full effort. Sometimes it is minimum viable action. Both count. The rule is simple and uncompromising: the chain does not break. The form may change, the intensity may fluctuate, but the action remains. Your relationship with failure also changes here. Failure is no longer interpreted as proof of inadequacy or weakness. It becomes feedback, stripped of emotion. When something doesn't work, you don't spiral into self-judgment or abandon the process. You adjust the inputs and move on. This emotional neutrality toward failure is one of the most powerful advantages of this stage. It frees enormous mental energy that was previously wasted on shame, regret, or overanalysis. Others often misunderstand this phase. From the outside, it can look like you've become detached or even cold. In reality, you've simply stopped outsourcing your emotional state to outcomes. You no longer rise and fall with every success or setback. Your sense of stability comes from adherence to process, not results. This makes you appear calm under pressure, but the calm is not passive. It is anchored in repetition and proof. Here, discipline also begins to influence your decisions beyond the original practice. You become more selective with commitments, more honest about capacity, and less tolerant of distractions disguised as opportunities. You don't chase everything that looks beneficial. You ask whether it aligns with the system you've already built. If it doesn't, you decline without guilt. This is not selfishness. It is structural integrity. Time itself begins to feel different. Because your actions are consistent, days stop blurring together in regret. Progress becomes measurable not in sudden breakthroughs, but in accumulation. You realize that most meaningful change happens quietly, below the threshold of excitement. This understanding eliminates impatience. You stop rushing toward outcomes and start trusting accumulation. What once felt slow now feels inevitable. This phase also exposes a hard truth: not everyone can follow you here. Some people prefer cycles of motivation and collapse because they provide emotional drama and excuses. Your steadiness disrupts that pattern. You may lose resonance with people who thrived on chaos or constant reinvention. This is not a failure. It is a natural consequence of alignment. Discipline clarifies relationships just as it clarifies behavior. Internally, the most important skill you develop now is restraint under competence. You are capable, reliable, and effective, which creates the temptation to do more, say yes more often, or carry extra weight for others. Discipline at this level means knowing when not to expand. Growth is no longer about addition, but refinement. You strengthen what exists instead of constantly building something new. By the end of this phase, discipline has fully crossed from effort into environment. Your routines, standards, and behaviors create a gravity that pulls you back into alignment even when you drift. You no longer fear losing discipline because you understand it is not a fragile state. It is a practiced return. And as long as you return, without drama, without delay, you remain on the path. This is the quiet power of the sixth stage, not domination, not intensity, but durability. The ability to continue when enthusiasm fades, when conditions worsen, and when no one is watching. This is where discipline stops being visible and starts being invincible. The seventh stage begins when discipline no longer feels like resistance against yourself, but cooperation with who you have become. The internal conflict that once drained your energy has largely disappeared. You are no longer negotiating with hesitation every morning or convincing yourself to act. The decision has already been made by the identity you've built. Action follows almost automatically, not because it is easy, but because it is aligned. You are no longer trying to become disciplined. You are acting from discipline. At this level, identity replaces motivation entirely. You don't ask how to feel motivated, you ask whether an action fits the kind of person you are. This shift is subtle but profound. When identity governs behavior, inconsistency feels unnatural. Skipping practice or abandoning standards no longer feels like relief, it feels like friction. Discipline becomes self-reinforcing because every aligned action strengthens the identity that produced it. You also develop a deeper awareness of energy rather than effort. Instead of forcing intensity at all times, you learn to modulate output without compromising consistency. You understand when to push and when to conserve, not based on emotion, but on long-term sustainability. This prevents burnout and preserves clarity. Strength here is not brute force, it is intelligent endurance. Ego dissolves in this phase. You no longer need recognition for being disciplined. You don't announce routines, defend choices, or compare paths. The work is internal and private. External validation becomes irrelevant because the internal standard is clear and sufficient. This quiet confidence often gets mistaken for detachment, but it is actually deep self-trust built through repeated proof. Time pressure loses its power over you. Because you operate from process instead of urgency, deadlines feel like coordinates rather than threats. You move steadily toward them without panic. Even when stakes are high, your nervous system remains regulated because it has been trained through repetition. You've practiced staying calm so often that calm becomes your default response. In this stage, discipline begins to shape how you think, not just what you do. Your thoughts become more structured, less reactive, and more deliberate. You pause before responding. You observe impulses without obeying them. This mental discipline compounds the physical and behavioral discipline you've already built, creating a unified system rather than separate practices. You also notice that your tolerance for noise decreases. Distractions, empty conversations, and unnecessary conflict feel exhausting. Not because you are weak, but because you are refined. You protect your attention instinctively, knowing that focus is the foundation of everything you've built. What once entertained you now feels expensive. By the end of this stage, discipline has fully integrated into your identity. There is no longer a before and after version of you. There is only the person who acts with intention, regardless of mood or circumstance. This is not perfection. You still miss steps. But you return without self-attack, without delay, without drama. The seventh stage is where discipline becomes quiet authority. Not something you perform, but something you embody. And once discipline reaches this level, it no longer asks for effort. It simply asks for loyalty. The eighth stage begins when discipline stops being something you use to control chaos and starts becoming the structure that allows freedom. At this level, you realize that the routines you once feared would limit you are the very systems that give you space to think, create, and move with clarity. Freedom is no longer doing whatever you want in the moment. It is having enough internal order that impulses no longer dictate your life. By now, your days have a natural rhythm. You wake, train, work, reflect, and rest with intention. Not because a schedule forces you, but because disorder feels uncomfortable. You've trained yourself to recognize the subtle stress that comes from randomness. When structure disappears, your mind notices immediately. You restore order not through panic, but through simple, practiced actions. This stage is marked by a new relationship with discomfort. Pain no longer signals danger or failure, it signals information. Fatigue becomes data. Resistance becomes a diagnostic tool. Instead of asking, "How do I escape this?" you ask, "What is this teaching me?" This reframing turns challenges into training grounds rather than obstacles. You also begin to experience emotional stability that others mistake for emotional numbness. In truth, you still feel deeply, but your reactions are no longer explosive. You respond instead of react. You choose words carefully. You pause before judgment. Emotional discipline now mirrors physical discipline, controlled, efficient, and purposeful. Comparison loses its grip here. Watching others move faster or slower no longer triggers insecurity. You understand that mastery unfolds on individual timelines. Because your standards come from within, external benchmarks lose relevance. You respect excellence in others without feeling threatened by it. Focus at this stage becomes immersive. When you work, you are fully present. When you rest without guilt. This separation sharpens both states. Productivity improves not because you work longer, but because attention is no longer fragmented. Multitasking fades away, replaced by deliberate single-task execution. There is also a shift in how you relate to failure. Mistakes no longer provoke shame. They provoke analysis. You study breakdowns the same way a craftsman studies a flawed tool. Calmly. Objectively. With the intention to refine rather than punish. This mindset allows faster growth with less emotional cost. Physically, your body reflects this integration. Movement feels coordinated rather than forced. Breathing is deeper. Posture is natural. These are not aesthetic changes, they are signs of a nervous system that trusts itself. Your body is no longer in constant defense mode. The eighth stage reveals a paradox: the more disciplined you become, the less rigid you feel. Adaptability increases. You can change plans without losing momentum because discipline is no longer tied to specific rituals, but to principles. You carry order within you. By the end of this stage, discipline is no longer experienced as effort. It is experienced as alignment. And alignment creates a kind of freedom that chaos never could. The ninth stage arrives when discipline matures into leadership over the self. You are no longer managing habits one by one, you are governing an internal system. Decisions feel cleaner, faster, and less emotionally charged because you trust the structure you've built. There is no inner debate about whether you should act. The only question left is how precisely you will execute. At this point, your mind operates with strategic patience. You no longer rush outcomes or demand immediate results. You understand that pressure distorts judgment, and you refuse to act from urgency unless absolutely required. This patience is not passive. It is controlled aggression, waiting for the correct moment to move. You become acutely aware of leverage. Instead of spreading energy thin, you focus on the few actions that create disproportionate impact. This applies to work, relationships, and training. You cut what is unnecessary without guilt. Efficiency replaces excess. Precision replaces noise. Emotionally, you develop a deep resilience that others can feel in your presence. You don't absorb chaos. When tension rises, you remain centered. This doesn't make you distant, it makes you reliable. People trust you because your reactions are stable, your words measured, and your behavior consistent. You also recognize when to disengage. Not every battle deserves your attention. Not every opinion requires a response. Discipline teaches selectivity. Silence becomes a tool, not a weakness. You conserve energy for moments that truly matter. Your relationship with fear evolves dramatically. Fear still appears, but it no longer commands your behavior. You observe it, assess its message, and move anyway when necessary. Courage here is not dramatic. It is quiet compliance with principle despite internal resistance. There is a noticeable shift in how you experience time. Days feel full but not rushed. You move with purpose rather than haste. This creates a sense of calm momentum, as if life is moving forward without friction. Stress does not vanish, but it no longer controls your internal state. At this stage, discipline begins to radiate outward. Without trying, you influence others. Not through advice or instruction, but through example. People notice your consistency, your composure, your refusal to be reactive. Your presence becomes instructional. You no longer feel the need to prove strength. It is evident in how you handle pressure, loss, and uncertainty. Your confidence is grounded, not inflated. It comes from knowing you can rely on yourself when conditions deteriorate. The ninth stage is where discipline transforms into authority. Not authority over others, but authority over your own life. And once that authority is established, very little can shake it. The final stage begins when discipline stops feeling like a practice and becomes a way of being. There is no sense of arrival, no dramatic finish line, only a quiet recognition that the internal war is over. You are no longer divided against yourself. Thought, intention, and action move in the same direction. At this level, effort is replaced by inevitability. You do what must be done not because you force yourself, but because it would feel unnatural not to. Discipline is no longer something you summon, it is something you express. Like posture or tone of voice, it is simply part of you. You understand now that mastery is not intensity but consistency over time. This realization removes impatience entirely. You stop chasing breakthroughs and focus on refinement. Small adjustments, repeated endlessly, become the source of exponential change. Your relationship with adversity transforms completely. Challenges are no longer interruptions, they are confirmations. When difficulty appears, you recognize it as a signal that growth is occurring. You meet resistance with curiosity instead of frustration. Pressure sharpens you rather than breaking you. Ego has almost no influence here. Praise does not inflate you. Criticism does not destabilize you. Your sense of worth is internal and stable. You measure success by adherence to your code, not by external applause. There is a deep sense of responsibility that emerges at this stage. Not obligation, but ownership. You understand that your state of being affects everyone around you. Your calm reduces chaos. Your discipline creates order. Without speaking, you lead. Freedom at this level feels paradoxical. Your life is highly structured, yet internally spacious. Because you are no longer fighting yourself, energy becomes available for creativity, contribution, and depth. Discipline has removed friction, not added it. You also accept impermanence fully. You know that strength must be maintained, clarity must be protected, and standards must be renewed daily. There is no arrogance in this understanding, only respect for the process. This stage does not make you invincible. It makes you resilient. You will still fail. You will still fall. But you will never stay down long, because your system is designed to recover, not collapse. The final truth is simple: discipline was never about control. It was about unity. And once unity is achieved, the path does not end. It continues, quietly, every day, through deliberate action and unwavering presence.